I'm so glad to be with you as we continue our Nehemiah study. Those of you who have been continuing week by week, lesson by lesson, thank you for engaging this process. I hope you found Nehemiah as fascinating as I find him, and so much, because Nehemiah is in a rebuilding project. He's rebuilding broken walls and burnt gates around the city of Jerusalem. And we have places that are broken in our lives, and places of function that need to be restored, like those gates. And we find incredible paradigms in Nehemiah's story that just help us in the rebuilding of our own lives. So we're up to episode 7, and here in episode 7, we're going to encounter who I like to think are our favorite bad guys by this point. We've heard these names almost every chapter. It's Sanballat, governor of Samaria, Tobiah, Geshem, the Arab, and the rest of our enemies. I mean, everybody. They heard that I had rebuilt the wall, and not a gap was left in it, though up to that time I had not set the doors and the gates. And this is pretty critical, that this piece be finished. Otherwise, there's still vulnerability. The enemy can come in. The activity around the gates of city governance and business transactions could not yet function. So he's almost done, but not quite. That's where some of us are living right now. I mean, we've made progress, but the question is, are we going to really finish what started? And here is where the enemy will use another one of his classic tactics. So far, with Sanballat and Tobiah, like back in chapter 2, we saw him use like accusation. He went after his motives. Are you rebelling against the king? And just tried to accuse him. And then the really common tool of the enemy, just to wear us down with discouragement. What are those feeble Jews doing? That's just discouragement. And then we saw in chapter 4 later, the last part of chapter 4, intimidation. Wherever they turn, we're just going to attack them. We're just going to come out. This is harassment. This is the enemy harassing us to make us what? In the middle of the word intimidation. To make us timid. To make us timid and back off. Well, none of this is working. And the ways that Nehemiah responds to each one of these has been really a lot of the instructive content so far of studying the life of Nehemiah. I mean, his tactics to counter the enemy's attempts to slow the rebuilding process down are really helpful and instructive, as we'll see again today. But today, with everything but the gates being finished, the enemies are getting desperate. These things haven't worked yet, so they're going to try a new tactic. Let's just get Nehemiah out of town. Let's distract him. Let's get him off the premises and away from him finishing this project. And distractions are an incredible tool of the enemy in our lives. We hear about the tyranny of the urgent, where there's this fight between what's urgent and what's important. And one of the tragic things about life is that urgent things aren't always the most important things. And yet they're always pushing out the most important things. Got to be now. Got to be done now. And they just keep distracting us from getting the big things done in our lives. So Sanballat and Geshem, verse 2 of chapter 6, sent me this message. Here's the distraction. Come, let's meet together in one of the villages on the plain of Ono. The plain of Ono. But, important word here, and when we're dealing with the enemy, I want you to know there's always a but. To the places of resistance to growth. Everywhere you're growing, everywhere you're trying to fulfill the mission of Jesus, there's going to be resistance. But thank God for these divine buts or howevers or there's another way of looking at this. However, they were scheming to harm me. I mean, Nehemiah could see right through them. Now, Ono was 27 miles northwest of Jerusalem. So by foot, this would have been a 1 or 2 day journey. It would have taken an extra day probably to prepare to take a journey like this. And it's another day or two coming back, let alone the time he'd spend in Ono with them. I mean, this was a major, get him off the premises. Let's distract him. And he said they were also isolating him and they could have harmed him there. So how does he respond? This only works in English, but you've maybe heard this if you've studied Nehemiah before. To the invitation to go to Ono, his response was, oh no, I'm going to say no to the distractions in my life. I think it was von Goethe who said, may the things that matter most never be at the mercy of the things that matter least. I mean, the things that matter least, we've got to say no to often. Sometimes it's as important what you say no to as what you say yes to, because those urgent things, those less important things, often they just get us off task. They get us off kilter. They were scheming to harm me. So I sent messengers, verse 3. This is Nehemiah here. I sent messengers to them with this reply. Here's his, oh no, I'm not doing this. I am carrying on a great project. I'm carrying on a great project and cannot go down. That is an amazing sentence. I don't know, for some reason that sentence sticks in me. I mean, almost every month I'll have that sentence go through my head. I'm doing a great work. I hope you feel like, if you're being faithful to what the Lord's called you, if you're loving your spouse, if you're raising your kids, if you're supervising that work team at work, if you're teaching that class, if you're volunteering in your church, I hope that you feel like what you're doing is important. And if it's important, it gives you a reason to say no to the things that get you off task. I'm carrying on a great work and I cannot go down. I just love that phrase. I'm carrying on a great work. I mean, that has to be a part of our whole mentality. And so why should the work stop while I leave it? And that's what distractions do. It makes the work stop. Why? Because we leave it. And we put our energy and attention into other things. Why should the work stop while I leave it to go down to you? And this is number one in Nehemiah's strategy. You need to decide what's important. I worry that I fear that a lot of people have never taken the time to decide what's most important in life. I mean, what is your purpose in life? What is it? A friend of mine said, God's looking for people who know what they're living for, live at 100%, and they change their surroundings rather than just yielding to them. This is deciding what's important and staying 100% on it. And that's why Nehemiah does something else. Because 4 times, so first of all, after the first invitation to Ono, Nehemiah says, oh no, I'm not going there. Why should I leave I'm doing a great work. Why should I leave the work? No, they didn't give up. 4 times. They sent me the same message. And each time, thank God, I gave them the same answer. You know what that is? That is focus. They stayed focused on the priorities. And once you decide what's important, you learn the discipline of staying focused. Usually that requires a plan and a schedule. You make a plan and put yourself on a schedule, and you say, this will help me stay focused on what's most important, and say, oh no, to those oh no distractions. But there's going to be, the enemies aren't giving up. I mean, they're desperate at this point. Then the 5th time, Sanballat sent his aides with the same message. That's come to Ono. But this time he has a letter he gives to Nehemiah, a letter. We're not going to read the contents of all the letter in the next couple of verses, but basically they throw everything plus the kitchen sink at Nehemiah here. I mean, they go back to accusations and discouragement and intimidation and just reinforce the distraction. When you get a really critical letter, I mean, they just hammer on Nehemiah. And when you get a critical letter, I know when I get them, it just takes an emotional toll on you. And even that alone is an energy drainer. It's like instead of putting your energy in the most important things, it just drains your energy. And so poor Nehemiah, he is just having to deal with this again. And I sent him this reply. Nothing like what you were saying is happening. You're just making it up. And thank God for his courage. And thank God for his self-awareness. And he challenges their assumptions. Because they were all trying to frighten us, thinking their hands will get too weak for the work and it will not be completed. And this is the big issue. Is what started in your life going to be completed? What's it going to take to finish it? He's almost done, but not quite. and everything's being thrown at him so that completion doesn't happen. That's a very important word. That's a word God's very interested in our lives, completed. He wants to finish what he started. And you notice that here in Nehemiah, he's not naive, and he's got an adequate amount of self-awareness that he just doesn't feel bad because people don't like him. I mean, he said, no, they're just trying to frighten me here. They're just making this up. This is not true. I mean, it takes a certain amount of emotional courage to be able to counter that kind of resistance. But he said in the next verse, but I prayed. Now strengthen my hands, Lord, just strengthen my hands. And this really is the third thing he does. He meets distractions with faith to not give up. I'm not going to give up at this point in my life. He decided what's important. He stayed focused on his priorities. And with faith, he brought his spirituality into this. And he met the distractions with faith to not give up. One day I sat down years ago, and I end up kind of paraphrasing this in terms of things that I face in my own life, and I think all of us do. And it kind of like three sort of life ethics. One of my friends has this on his office wall. He calls it Bradford's very hard but almost impossible philosophy. And so you can take that for what it is. But I just think it's important when it comes to dealing with distractions that we put our best energy into our most important relationships. And that's sort of like Nehemiah deciding what's important. And there's nothing more important than your relationships. What are your most important relationships? Are you giving them leftover energy, or are you putting your best energy there? That's part of deciding what's important, which Nehemiah did. Oh no, I'm doing a great work and I'm not going to go down and visit you. And then put your best resources into your top goals. This is where that focus comes in. And you have a plan, put yourself on a schedule, and you don't work on those goals when you have the least amount of resources, but you try to pour your best resources into your top goals. If you're running a company, you've got to do that if you're going to succeed. If you're parenting kids, you've got to do that if you're going to succeed. If you're involved in leading a small group at your church, you've got to do that. If you're a volunteer of any kind, you put your best resources into your top goals. And then put your best attitude into your worst disappointments. Because everything's going to make you want to give up. And you've got to be very careful about disappointments. They're like massive distractions to you. They'll drain your emotional energy instead of having that spiritual, emotional power to put into what is really most important. And they keep you from giving up. You know, you don't want to give up. You want to give up? No. Oh no, we're not giving up now. So the wall was completed. I love this verse, the next verse. So the wall was completed on the 25th of Elul in 52 days. This is an engineering marvel that he could have rebuilt those walls and gates in 52 days. In other words, the wall was when he says the wall was completed, none of the tactics of the enemy worked. The wall was completed. And when all our enemies heard about this, all the surrounding nations were afraid, and they, get this, they lost their confidence. Because they realized that this work had been done with the help of God. How else could they have done it in that short a time, in less than 2 months, with the help of our God? And the enemies lost their confidence. My prayer for you is that the devil loses confidence when Jesus finishes his work in your life. When you do stay focused on what's most important, and when you don't give up, especially just before you're finished. That can be the most risky time to really give up. In fact, I love what Paul says to the Philippians in Philippians 1, verse 4. In all my prayers for you, I pray with you with joy. Why? Because you're partners in the gospel. And then he gives us some time reference points from the first day until now. From the first day until now, you're carrying on well. I have joy because of that. You're partnering in the gospel. You're part of the mission of Jesus. But he says, as I pray for you, I pray being confident of this, that he who began, this is past tense, a good work in you, will carry it on to completion. After 2 days, the walls were completed. And I just believe that God's going to carry on to completion what he started in your life. Nehemiah said, Lord, just strengthen my hands. Help me not give up now. Help me not to be distracted now. Help me to finish what you've started in my life. And Jesus is behind you in that task. So here are some, I'm sure you have some takeaways from this. Here are some possible discussion points. Like we said earlier, what you say no to is sometimes as important as what you say yes to. And growth will require prayerfully setting priorities and staying focused. In what ways are you doing that in your life right now? And finally, God really can give us the strength to not give up and to not give in. He can give us the strength to not give in to distractions or give up prematurely. May God help you with that. So God bless you as you reflect on these things.